Welcome, my friends, to day 19 of the 20-day flower creation journey. We are almost at the end, and today we are going to paint the cherry blossoms. We are all used to stare at the cherry blossoms, especially in the months of March and April. And so here we are today to try to paint them on this flower color journey. So the first thing I do is to take my filbert brush in size 8 from Princeton, and I mix a little bit of magenta and scarlet lake to start to create a little bit this pink color that is typical of these cherry blossoms. I want to use a filbert brush because the shape of the brush in itself will help me to create these round shapes of these flowers. So the first thing I do is to create this very simple and basic shape, is a round shape onto paper by pressing especially the belly and the side of the brush onto paper. The way I approach this composition is to create these flowers building layers. The first layer is a very transparent and translucent layer where the amount of pigment is not very concentrated, therefore there is a high amount of water, and I just press onto the paper my brush and I let it sit onto paper. I pay attention to create different color hues. That means that I mix different percentages of, for example, magenta and yellow ochre to create this color, but I also pay attention to change the color hue. That means that I lay onto paper some brush strokes where the concentration of the pigment is different, and when I remove most of the pigment into my cup of water, the concentration onto the paper is going to be very, very light. In this phase, I'm just creating some round shapes onto paper, and I'm looking at the reference picture to understand where to place more or less these cherry blossoms. And I am not too concerned if the shape overall is not identical to what I see. It is just an approximation of the picture that I have in front of me. If I look at this reference picture, I notice that these cherry blossoms are basically hanging from some sort of branches. Therefore, I keep in mind to leave some space to create in a second step these branches, but also I keep in mind to place these cherry blossoms in areas where it makes sense to have a branch going through. For this painting, considering the colors that I have available on my color palette, I am mainly using a little bit of magenta and mixing it with a little bit of yellow ochre or cobalt blue to obtain different color hues. The shape of a filbert brush is perfect to create these round shapes of the cherry blossoms. But if you don't have a filbert brush at hand, you can easily create something very similar using a round brush too. You can use a round brush and especially the belly of a round brush, so put a little bit of pressure, and I'm sure you will be able to create something similar to this. At this moment, I am adding a little bit of different brush strokes in color compared to what I have on the base. And for this reason, I'm basically adding a little bit of scarlet lake into my mixture of magenta to add a little bit of warmth into these cherry blossoms. Now that the first layer is complete, I am taking my mop brush to start to build the second layer on top. I decide to use this mop brush because due to its shape, I can be quite loose to create the second layer on top of the first one. And what I mean by creating a second layer on top is to create on the color palette a mixture of for example, scarlet lake and magenta, and by using just the tip of this brush and not so much pressure, I start to tap the area where there is the first layer of the cherry blossom, and I started to create some little sort of dots and C-shape to start to create this characteristic shape of these flowers. In this process, I'm not being too precise. I am just mainly playing with the colors, with the color use and color values, and I'm literally just touching the paper with not so much pressure and try to create, let's say, these ruffled edges all over these flowers. As I said, I am mainly using two techniques. Either I touch with the point of the brush, with the tip of the brush, the paper, and I just do some little points, or with my wrist, I create some short C shapes all around, and I am able to achieve this result of having ruffled edges. I keep in mind that in order to have a composition that is nice to look at, all of these flowers need to overall have different color values and color use to let these flowers stand. This process is quite simple and a little bit repetitive, but I think it's perfect to improve the pressure of your brush strokes onto paper when the pressure needs to be quite light. Also, I think that these cherry blossoms flowers are beautiful in themselves, but they can also be used as filling flowers in some of your compositions. So this can be an idea of a flower that maybe you have not thought of using maybe often together with other flowers, but adding maybe a branch of cherry blossoms here and there can really be nice. So I thought bringing you this sort of tutorial can be beneficial for you from different point of view, to improve your technique of brush strokes, to improve your techniques of layering different layers of painting onto paper, but also to give you access to different flowers that you might have not thought of painting in your flower compositions. And when we are quite satisfied with the amount of flowers laid onto paper and their shapes, we can start to create the branches where these flowers are hanging from. I create a mixture of burnt umber, of Mars black, and I also add a little bit of Prussian blue to give it to this color a little bit more depth. I just use the very fine tip of my brush, round brush in size 6, and I look at the reference picture to understand where to create these branches, but I also look at what I have created to understand better where these flowers need to hang from. When I create these branches, I'm not being too precise and I'm not creating just some straight lines, but I am leaving some white spaces between the brush strokes because the white paper underneath will help us to create an overall look of these branches, giving a more loose effect also for these lines. And now that also the branches are ready, I'm going to use the mop brush to start creating these little leaves. I mix a little bit of sap green and a little bit of yellow lemon dip, and with this bright green I started to just touch with the tip of the mop brush the paper, and I created these small leaves that I see on the reference picture. I actually look at the reference picture to understand where to place some of these leaves, but then I just look at what I have created and I place these leaves where I think they fit better this sort of painting. When I use the very tip of the brush, these leaves are pretty small, but when I start to use the belly of this brush, these leaves are going to be slightly thicker. I refine the painting by adding a few branches where I have added leaves that are just floating. And overall, I just look at what I have created and I check if there are maybe some empty spaces that I want to fill or some shapes that I wanted to optimize. But overall, I am pretty happy with what I've created, and I hope these flowers can inspire your next paintings and can help you to create something a little bit different. Thank you for watching this tutorial. I hope to see you tomorrow on day 20.